Shigeru Miyamoto once said, "A delayed game is eventually good, but a rushed game is forever bad." And while those were wise words at the time and still apply today in many situations, they're becoming less and less the case, as games get bigger and bigger updates and bigger patches to turn them from either being terrible to being pretty good, or being pretty good to being absolutely fantastic. Now, while I still think there are exceptions to that rule, like things like No Man's Sky, I think no matter how many updates that game gets, just the core game, that is truly broken in my opinion, and I just won't enjoy it. But this makes it very, very difficult to decide on a top 10 list, at least for me. So let's talk about that. Now, when you're judging a top 10 games of the year, should you judge them on their release, what they could potentially be down the future, or what they are right now, maybe at the very end of 2016? Even if developers have promised various things that will definitely be coming to it. And this is really difficult, because you don't want to give an unfair advantage to games that were released earlier in the year and then games that were released later. For example, let's talk about stuff like Doom. Doom was released fantastically, well optimized, all that good stuff. Really, really good single player campaign. However, the multiplayer wasn't that great. Snap Map was okay. Now, Snap Map is pretty great, and the multiplayer is pretty fucking solid. It's not bad at all. Suddenly, the game's value, at least for me, has gone up. And then the same goes for things like Overwatch. Overwatch is, clearly it's a Blizzard game, so it's a long-term game. But it was released in, May? So, of course, the value of that is just going to increase over time. And when so many people are considering Overwatch as a Game of the Year contender, if not their favourite Game of the Year, would that be the case if it didn't get all of these updates, if it was just the base game throughout the entirety of the year? I kinda doubt it. But then you have games that have released later on in the year, and I feel kinda bad for them when they're not given as much time to be good enough to be considered for many people to be in their top 10s. Now, of course, many people will just say, well, just judge the game based on the game. But there are certain updates and fixes that can improve your experience of that game exponentially. Let's just talk about optimizations really quickly. Dishonored 2, loving the game itself, but the PC port is a fucking mess, and it drops, even on my GTX 1080 with an i7, drops below 60 FPS, no matter what settings are on, and that's ridiculous, and dampens my enjoyment of what is otherwise a pretty fantastic game. I love Dishonored 1, and that didn't have those problems. But another game in the same vein, Deus Ex Mankind Divided, was released a bit earlier with some optimization issues, but then has now got them fixed. So, should we be judging these on two different levels, or on the same level? Should we be judging the release, or what they are now? Or should I just ignore the frame rate drops, which are really hard for me, at least personally, to ignore when they directly affect my experience, especially when there are other things like the mouse problems that the game had and kind of still has, but as of 1.3, it's not so bad. When that affects my direct control of the game and makes it worse, so should I judge them both on the release? Or then how they are now? Or think about what they could be in the future? Or just ignore all of that altogether? But then there are games, like I mentioned before, like Overwatch, and even stuff like Hitman. Hitman was an episodic game, I understand it's very different from all of these others. But along with the episodes came optimizations. When it was first released, not very well optimized. Not the best. Now, all the episodes are released. I think it's a great package. Very well optimized. I think some PCs are still having issues. And the thing is, this feels like it should just be a PC problem, right? And it should just be a problem that people like me have to deal with when talking about our top 10 games of the year. But then we see it creeping into games like Final Fantasy XV and The Last Guardian. Games like this, console games, which for the longest time I was just like, okay, it's released, that is the game. It's usually running at a solid 30 or a solid 60 FPS. That's not the case anymore. It can be with games like Uncharted 4 running supremely well, because Naughty Dog are gods of PlayStation, clearly. They know how to optimize their games to a T when they can get something as beautiful as Uncharted 4 running on a base PS4 in 1080p, 30 FPS, solid throughout. But then you see things like Final Fantasy 15 and The Last Guardian, which have bad frame pacing, they are stuck at 30 and then they even dip below it, and that's where the main problem is, because it's when you dip below 30 that the experience becomes really hard to swallow for me. It's really difficult to enjoy it as much as I'd like, especially with something like The Last Guardian. I love the look of the game, the effects. I love Trico. How can you not love Trico? It's a big fucking bird dog thing. You gotta love it. But then when it drops below even 25 frames a second, it's really difficult. And then on top of that, there's a weird delay in the camera, and there's a weird delay in all of your controls and movements. However, all of that stuff seems like it could be patched out. It could be optimized. It might be optimized by like January, maybe March next year. Do I consider that? Or do I just ignore it all and I'm like, no, this goes at my number 9 spot, or maybe even doesn't make it into my top 10, because the state it's in now, I can't rightly give it, that accolade, shall we say. But then obviously if it was released in March, then by now it would probably be fixed and it would be fine. But maybe it'll never be fixed. Who knows? They're not being very vocal, at least with stuff about Last Guardian. However, they are with Final Fantasy 15, and this pushes things even further. Just look at these patch notes. It's insane. Their update plan is wonderful. I love how much support they are dedicating to the game and how much they're trying to improve it. But they're changing the actual story. They're adding cutscenes. And while I love that, I also hate that, because it changes the game so fundamentally in how people experience it. When you ask someone, oh yeah, what did you think of Final Fantasy 15? Oh yeah, what version did you play it on? Was it 1.1 or 1.5? Which one was it? Because their experience could be very different depending. So while I appreciate the support, part of me is just like, I would rather the game in 2017, I know, yeah, we were waiting for it for like 10 years. I would rather the game in 2017 with all of this stuff. But then, would it have had all of this stuff anyway if it weren't for the player feedback? Like, do I give credit to the developers for listening to the players and supporting that? Does that give points towards the game? Or do I just judge it how it is now? Even though they've promised all of these wonderful improvements will come, and maybe they'll even improve the optimization and the frame pacing, and that'll just make it a better game to play. I guess it means that top 10s are becoming a bit less relevant in terms of whenever they were released. Because at least for me, there are various things like, let me just give this as an example. Say, Witcher 3 last year got a fantastic update this year. I'm not talking about the Blood and Wine expansion, although that was amazing as well. It got a big UI update, big change. It improved a lot of my problems with it, fixed a lot of my complaints. It was wonderful. Say if that was released last year, would I have put it above Bloodborne? Maybe. Maybe I would have, because it just had such a big impact on the game for me. But then again, it's another thing that's extremely subjective. While one thing could be updated and somebody might go, hey, I mean, come on, it's just a little update. My feelings about the game, they're the same. For another person, that one thing that they changed or improved, or even maybe it was something that they took away that they really liked, that one thing could just completely turn their mind around about the game, because now that problem that they were trying to get past to enjoy the game, they don't have to get past it anymore because it's fixed. But what do you think about this? At the same time as wanting to support and reward developers for their continued support of their games, should we also just focus on people that have released games like Superheart and Firewatch and all these things that were just released and were great, at least in my opinion, and were just great from the offset, and maybe ignore all these other ones that got huge improvements via updates or will be getting them? Should I wait 6 months down the line, halfway into 2017, to make a 2016 list? Because that's probably a more comprehensive look at each of those games. should I let you guys know what version of the game I'm playing on? Because the thing is, my feelings could have completely changed, like a couple months down the line. One game could be taken off the list and another game could be put in its place because the update was that significant. We've got games like Darkest Dungeon, which I thought were pretty great at release, but they've added so much more that their value has just evolved so much. Just like games like Doom and Overwatch. Or do we just judge it on the base game? I don't know. Do you? What are your thoughts on this? Please do let me know in the comments below. I think this is a fascinating topic and very indicative of the kind of gaming world in which we live in now. And like it or not, that is how it is, unfortunately. Developers are taking more and more advantage of the patching system to deliver the better and most optimal experience somewhere down the line. And you can't completely blame them because it's the publishers who want to push it out the door. But at the same time, the publishers are mainly just trying to please the shareholders, and they have to look like the bad guys in this situation. They have to be like, no, you have to put it out now, and that's why they work frantically to provide players with a day one patch. And sometimes that can fix everything, and sometimes it can just make a few adjustments, but the game still isn't good enough. You know, that's why review scores for games, I feel, even less and less relevant now, because, I mean, you could add or detract a point depending on which way the game has gone after it's been updated. But as we've talked about, there are games that doesn't even apply to, and that's wonderful. Thank you to those games. Thank you to the Oxenfrees and the Firewatches. But then there are things like Hyper Light Drifter, which got a 60 FPS update. I did not like that game so much at 30, especially an action-oriented game. Felt like shit playing at 30, but those guys worked for like, I don't know, it was like 4 to 6 months to provide us with a 60 FPS update, and they fucking came through and it felt great. And suddenly, my experience was a lot better. That puts it to me as a contender for at least my top 10 list. Maybe not my game of the year, but at least on my top 10 list, where it wouldn't have been before. Think about that, that's just kind of crazy, isn't it? And of course something like that isn't going to mean as much to other people. But that's why I want to hear from other people. I want to hear from you. What do you think about this whole situation? How do you think games should be judged? Do top 10s come out too soon? Do you think people should wait maybe a year, maybe half a year down the line to deliver their verdict on their favourite games? Should top 10s even be a thing? Or should we just say these are the games that we think you should check out? Because for me, sometimes doing a top 10 is like my number one. Not only is it the game that I most enjoyed, but usually it's the game that I would most recommend everybody play if you can, if that's your sort of thing. And then once you've played that, move on to number 2. And then once you played that, move on to number 3. Number 3 doesn't seem like your sort of game? Okay, then check out number 4 on my list. That's how I see my top 10s at least. But what about you? I'd love to hear from you. Thank you so much for watching. Please feel free to like the video if you did like it, dislike it if you didn't. And I hope to see you guys in the next one.